Dust rose like a living ghost over the wide clearing, curling in the late sun as if the earth itself held its breath. 200 warriors stood encircling the boy, their painted faces grim, their ponies shifting beneath them, hooves striking restless against the packed soil. Bows were drawn, lances tipped toward the child at the center. He was pale, trembling, his golden hair catching the light like a beacon that did not belong in this place. At his side stood the old chief, shoulders cloaked in crow feathers black as midnight, eyes deep as stone. The silence was not empty, it was alive with menace. Each heartbeat was a drum. A raven cawed from the dead limb of a cottonwood, and the sound made the boy flinch. He wanted to speak, but his throat closed like a noose. The old men of the tribe whispered prayers under their breath, while the younger ones snarled and spat into the dirt. The air smelled of sweat, leather, and fire waiting to be lit. It was a circle of judgment, and no one doubted that blood would fall before night. Chief Bloodcrow raised his hand, and the restless warriors froze. His face was lined with years of smoke and grief, the kind of face that saw further than the horizon. Slowly, he stepped forward until his shadow stretched across the boy. The child looked up, his blue eyes wide, his lips trembling on the edge of a question he did not know how to ask. Bloodcrow's gaze swept the circle, and when he spoke, his voice carried like thunder through still air. "He carries our blood," the chief declared. The words hit the gathering like the crack of a rifle. Horses snorted, men muttered, women gasped. Some shouted in disbelief, others growled curses at the sky. A few fell silent, uncertain if they had heard prophecy or betrayal. But the boy heard the words clear as church bells, and they sank into him like cold iron. Our blood. Not hers, not his, but theirs. The circle wavered, torn between reverence for the chief and the hunger for vengeance. Rattlesnake Jaw, wild-eyed and fierce, leaned forward on his pony and spat at the boy's boots. "He is no kin of ours," he barked. "He is the seed of thieves and graves." His words lit sparks among the warriors, who shouted and rattled their weapons. The boy felt their hatred pressing in like a wall of fire. He clutched his hands into fists, small and useless. Then came the moment of truth, the pause where fate trembles before falling. The chief turned to the boy, his hand on the child's shoulder, heavy as stone. And that's when the boy realized the truth, the terror sharp as steel. They hadn't gathered for cattle, nor for land. They had come for him. The day before the circle of warriors, the valley looked almost peaceful. The sun leaned hard against the hills, burning the grass to gold and making the fences groan as if they could not bear the weight of summer. Silas Pale Cub Drayton balanced barefoot on a fence rail, his arms outstretched, pretending he was a hawk in flight. His mother, Mercy Valen, stood nearby, her dress faded, hammer in hand as she tried to nail a warped board back into place on the roof of their lean-to barn. The smell of pitch and old timber hung in the air, mingling with the sweet ache of dust rising from the soil. "Come down from there, Silas," Mercy called, sweat darkening the strands of hair plastered to her cheeks. Her voice was sharp, but it carried the softness of worry beneath. The boy hopped down, landing with a grin, though it faded when he saw her eyes searching the horizon. She had grown restless these past weeks, always scanning the hills, listening for more than the wind. Silas didn't ask why children know fear without needing its name. That afternoon, a rider appeared in the distance. The figure sat tall on a dark pony, the sun throwing long shadows behind him. Silas squinted, the glare blinding, but when the rider came closer, he saw the hard-cut face of Rattlesnake Jaw, a warrior known for his temper as much as his skill. He said nothing, only stared at the boy with eyes sharp as broken glass, then turned his horse and rode away without a word. Mercy gripped her son's shoulder. Her knuckles were white. Later, at the creek that cut through the back of their land, Silas crouched to catch minnows in the shallow pools. The air was cooler here, the trickle of water soothing, yet something unsettled him. On the rocks, carved into the stone, were markings he had never seen before, strange symbols, jagged lines, and the shape of a raven's wing etched deep into the surface. His small fingers traced the grooves, and a shiver rippled through him though the sun was still warm. He did not know it, but those symbols were older than his family's claim to the land. When he returned home, Mercy was waiting at the cabin door. She asked where he had been, her voice sharp with panic. When he told her of the carvings, her face drained of color, and she pressed him into her arms. "You mustn't touch them again," she whispered, her breath trembling against his hair. "Promise me, Silas." The boy nodded, though the images burned in his mind like brands he could not wash away. That night, long after the lamp was blown out, Silas lay awake listening to the wind. He thought he heard the distant beat of drums, low and steady, like a heart echoing beneath the earth. He clutched the thin quilt tighter and turned his face toward the window, where the moon watched with an eye as pale as his own. And though he tried to sleep, he already knew the valley was waiting for something, and whatever it was coming for him. Morning broke with a haze of smoke drifting from unseen fires in the hills. Mercy Valen rose early, her face drawn and weary, and sent Silas Pale Cub Drayton to fetch water from the well. The rope creaked, the bucket clattered, and in the stillness of dawn he heard the echo of a far-off coyote howl. By the time he returned, a rider had already tethered his horse outside their cabin. Marshal Abner Cold Flint Harkins, his gray duster coated in dust, his revolver heavy on his hip. The marshal's eyes were narrow slits, hard and practical. He wasted no words. "Keep the boy close, Mercy. Blood Crow's people are moving again. If they claim him, the law won't protect you." Mercy bristled, clutching Silas to her side. "He's mine," she said, though her voice wavered. The marshal studied her face, then the boy's pale hair and blue eyes, as though searching for something hidden beneath the surface. He tipped his hat without answering and left as quickly as he had arrived. His silence felt more dangerous than his warning. Before noon, another visitor arrived, Orville Pig Iron Cade, a rancher with hands like rawhide and a sneer carved permanent into his face. He spat tobacco juice into the dirt and leaned against the cabin doorframe as if it belonged to him. "This land won't keep you safe," he told Mercy. "Sell it to me before the savages burn you out. A widow and a boy can't hold ground like this." His words dripped with false concern, but his eyes gleamed with hunger for the land, for control. Mercy turned him away, though she shook once the door closed, as if she denied not a man but the devil himself. That evening, when the sun slid red across the horizon, a shadow stepped into their yard. Hollowstag, a warrior tall and silent, his face carved with deep scars, set something on the porch rail, a small wooden carving shaped like a raven's wing. He did not speak, only looked at Silas with unreadable eyes before disappearing into the trees. Mercy lifted the token with trembling fingers. Its weight felt heavier than stone. Inside, the lamp flickered, throwing long shadows across the walls. Mercy's breath caught as she turned to her son. "They're calling you back," she whispered. Silas stared at the carving, tracing the grooves with his thumb. His heart thudded like hooves on hard ground. He did not understand, but he knew the choice before them would change everything: cling to the safety of the law, or step into a world written in smoke and blood. Outside, coyotes wailed and the wind shifted, carrying the smell of wood smoke from the hills. Silas felt it deep in his chest. Something had already begun, and the world would not wait for him to decide. The town of Dry Creek buzzed with unease, though no one dared to speak of it plainly. Inside the saloon, men nursed their whiskey with nervous hands, their eyes darting toward the windows whenever hoofbeats sounded from the street. That night, Jebediah Buzzard Eye Slade swore he had seen torches burning on the ridge, a line of warriors moving like shadows against the moonlight. He told the tale twice, each time louder, until even the poker players folded their hands in silence. His words spread through town like brushfire. They were gathering again. By morning, the rumors had teeth. A ranch hand claimed he found strange markings on the trees near the north pasture, spirals, raven wings, and the shape of claws. Mothers pulled their children inside, and even the dogs barked at the empty air. Reverend Obadiah Ashtongue Mercer thundered from the pulpit, his voice a whip of fire. "The child bears the mark of curse. The land groans beneath his blood." His congregation shifted uneasily in the pews, but none dared challenge him. Faith and fear made easy bedfellows. Back at the cabin, Mercy Valen tried to carry on with her chores, but every creak of the boards set her heart racing. Silas fetched water again, only to find the bucket rope sliced nearly through, as if by a hidden blade. He returned pale-faced, and when Mercy saw the frayed strands, she nearly dropped the bread she was kneading. Someone had been close, too close. She barred the door that night, her hands trembling as she slid the wooden beam into place. From the hills came the first sounds of warning. The low, steady beat of drums echoed faintly across the valley, carried by the wind. Silas stood at the window, the moonlight painting his face ghostly white. He swore he saw figures moving along the ridge, their shapes black against the starlit sky. He whispered it to Mercy, who pressed a finger to his lips, her own eyes wide with fear. But deep inside, she knew he wasn't imagining it. The next day, Marshal Abner Cold Flint Harkins rode by the cabin, his horse lathered in sweat. "They're restless," he muttered, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Silas. "If they move before harvest, there'll be blood in the streets." He urged Mercy to leave town, but she shook her head. To abandon the land meant surrendering to Pig Iron Cade, and she would not hand her son's future to a vulture. That evening, as the sun bled out across the horizon, smoke rose from beyond the ridge. Not campfire smoke, but the heavy, choking kind that carried ruin with it. The smell drifted through Dry Creek, and the townsfolk stepped into the street, staring north with dread. The threat was no longer distant. It was at their doorstep. The morning broke heavy, the sky a sheet of iron gray as if the heavens themselves braced for violence. Dust rose on the horizon long before the riders appeared, and when they did, the ground quaked with the thunder of hooves. A dozen warriors entered Dry Creek, their faces painted in streaks of red and black, spears glinting in the pale light. At their front rode Rattlesnake Jaw, his eyes wild, his grin sharp as a knife. He pulled his pony to a halt in the center of town, the saloon doors swinging open as men stepped warily into the street. Marshal Abner Cold Flint Harkins was the first to face him. The marshal's hand hovered near the butt of his revolver, though he did not draw. "State your business," he said flatly, his voice carrying the weight of law though he knew it meant little here. Rattlesnake Jaw leaned forward in the saddle, pointing straight at young Silas Pale Cub Drayton, who stood frozen beside his mother near the blacksmith's shop. "The boy," he barked. "Give him to us, or the valley burns." Gasps rippled through the townsfolk. Mercy clutched Silas to her side, her face pale but defiant. "He's my son," she cried, though her words shook like glass about to break. The marshal shifted his stance, putting himself between the warriors and the woman. "You'll find no trial here today," he warned. The tension stretched thin as wire. Every eye in the street watched, waiting for the snap that would unleash blood. It came suddenly, a bottle hurled from the saloon smashed against a post, startling one of the warriors' ponies. The animal reared, and in that instant, chaos erupted. Shouts, curses, the glint of steel. Silas stumbled as Mercy dragged him back toward cover, while the marshal fired a warning shot into the air. The crack split the silence, sending townsfolk scrambling for safety. Rattlesnake Jaw drew his knife, eyes locked on the boy, but the marshal lunged forward, shoving him back with the barrel of his revolver. For a heartbeat, it seemed the town might ignite in slaughter. Then, as quick as it had begun, the warriors pulled back, Rattlesnake Jaw spitting into the dirt at Mercy's feet. "This isn't over," he hissed, before turning his horse and galloping away, his riders following like storm clouds scattering across the hills. The street lay broken in their wake, barrels overturned, windows shattered, the echo of hooves lingering like thunder after lightning. The townsfolk emerged slowly, shaken and pale. Some looked at Mercy with pity, others with blame, whispering that she had brought this curse upon them. Silas felt their eyes burn into him, heavy with fear and suspicion. In that moment he knew their hatred was no safer than the warriors' spears. And deep inside, he understood, this fight would not end until everything he knew was torn apart. Night settled heavy over Dry Creek, the streets hushed as if the town itself feared to breathe. Inside the Whitford cabin, the single lamp flickered, throwing long shadows across the walls. Mercy Valen sat at the table, her hands clasped tight, her knuckles white with strain. Silas Pale Cub Drayton lingered nearby, tracing the raven carving left by Hollowstag, the grooves burning beneath his fingers. The boy wanted answers, but Mercy's lips pressed thin, her silence a shield she could no longer hold. At last, she spoke. "You were not born of this house, Silas. Not truly. You came to me on a night of fire and blood." Her words fell like stones into still water. Silas stared, his chest tightening as if the room itself had shrunk around him. Mercy's eyes glistened with tears, but her voice did not falter. "Your father died before you ever knew his face. And when the valley burned, I found you in the ashes, swaddled in cloth not my own. The warriors searched that night. They were looking for you, not for cattle, not for land. For you. The truth coiled through the boy's heart, sharp as barbed wire. Outside, the wind carried the sound of hoofbeats. A knock rattled the cabin door, low and steady. Mercy rose with dread heavy in her steps and opened it to reveal Jedediah Holloway Tullis, the mysterious drifter who seldom spoke but always watched. His gaze fixed on Silas, and his voice was gravel when he finally broke silence. The boy's blood ties him to Blood Crow. That is why they will not stop. He stepped inside, lowering his hat. He is both their kin and their curse. The revelation cracked something deeper than fear, it split open identity itself. Silas looked at his mother, desperate for denial, but Mercy only wept, confirming the words. I raised you as mine, she said, clutching his hands. But the truth is older than me, older than this land. The boy's breath hitched, and for the first time, he felt the weight of the raven's wing carving like destiny pressed into his palm. In the town, whispers grew. Reverend Obadiah Ashtongue Mercer declared the boy a harbinger of ruin, a vessel of divided blood. His sermons painted Silas as a spark that could set the frontier aflame. The marshal, though silent, began to weigh his duty against Mercy, his jaw tightening with every report of riders near the ridge. Even among the townsfolk, voices rose, some calling to protect the child, others to cast him out before worse befell them all. As the firelight dimmed, Silas felt the walls close in. The world had shifted beneath him, and there was no ground firm enough to stand on. He was not simply Mercy's son anymore, he was a bridge between two worlds already at war. And whether he wished it or not, his very blood had chosen the path ahead. The valley awoke to the sound of hooves, many hooves rolling like thunder across the ridge. By the time the townsfolk of Dry Creek gathered in the square, dust had risen in a thick wall, blotting out the morning sun. Rattlesnake Jaw and his riders had returned, not as a warning this time, but as a storm. They rode through the outskirts with torches in hand, setting fire to haystacks and barns, their war cries carrying across the fields. It was no longer a threat. It was war knocking at the door. Inside the cabin, Silas Pale Cub Drayton clutched the raven carving tight, his knuckles white. His mother, Mercy Valen, shoved belongings into a sack, her breath ragged. We'll run to the hills, she said, though even she did not believe her own words. The marshal had already warned her, flight was useless. The boy's blood bound him here as surely as chains. Silas wanted to beg her to let him face them, but his voice failed. He was 9 years old and trembling, yet every glance from Mercy made him feel the weight of a man's burden pressing against his chest. By noon, the warriors had encircled the town. Marshal Abner Cold Flint Harkins stood in the street, rifle across his arms, the few deputies beside him pale and sweating. The townsfolk hid behind shutters and doors, whispers leaking through the cracks like smoke. When Rattlesnake Jaw called out, his voice cracked through the silence like a whip, send us the boy, or the ground drinks your blood. His words echoed, and no answer came, only the restless stamping of horses and the crackle of flames from the outskirts. The marshal turned his gaze toward Mercy's cabin, his jaw tightening. He had sworn to uphold the law, but this was beyond law. He knew if he chose wrong, every soul in Dry Creek could pay the price. Inside the cabin, Mercy saw him standing there, waiting for a decision, his shadow stretched long across the dirt. For the first time, Silas realized the law might not protect him. Even the marshal could falter when the scales tipped against one boy. That night, the circle closed again. Warriors lined the ridge, torches burning bright against the dark sky. Their chants rose like thunder, rattling the earth beneath the boy's feet. Silas stepped forward, his small frame outlined against the firelight. Mercy cried out, pulling at his arm, but he shook free. For the first time, he did not hide behind her. He stood on the threshold, his heart hammering, his blood roaring in his ears. It was hopeless, and he knew it. He was one child against a nation's fury. Yet in that moment of despair, something flickered inside him, a spark, faint but alive. He thought of Blood Crow's words, of the raven's wing carved in wood, of the blood that bound him to more than fear. And though the night pressed in, he understood, he could not run, he could not hide. He would have to stand. The town square burned with the glow of torches, shadows dancing across the wooden storefronts like specters. The people of Dry Creek huddled behind shutters and broken fences, watching as 200 warriors filled the streets in a wave of painted faces and steel. At their head rode Chief Blood Crow, tall and grave, his cloak of feathers swaying in the firelight. Beside him was Rattlesnake Jaw, snarling, his hand tight on the haft of his spear. The world seemed to hold its breath as the chief raised his arm, silencing even the restless stamping of the ponies. Silas Pale Cub Drayton stood before them, a child outlined in fire, his knees trembling but his gaze fixed on the old chief. He remembered the words spoken in the clearing, "He carries our blood." Now, the weight of those words pressed heavier than ever. Blood Crow studied him, eyes unreadable, while Rattlesnake Jaw barked, "End this, chief. Take him now and spill the false blood." But Blood Crow did not move. He waited, as if testing whether the boy would break or stand. The marshal, Abner Cold Flint Harkins, stepped forward then, rifle gripped tight, his voice low but unyielding. "The boy stays. You'll not butcher him here." The warriors growled, shifting in their saddles, and the standoff teetered on the edge of violence. Mercy clung to her son's hand, whispering prayers through tears. It seemed the square would drown in blood before dawn. Then, unexpectedly, another voice cut through the uproar. It was Hollowstag, the scarred warrior who had once left the raven carving on Mercy's porch. He rode forward slowly, his face stern but calm, and dismounted before the chief. "The boy carries more than blood," he said, his deep voice carrying across the crowd. "He carries choice. To deny him is to deny the will of the spirits." Murmurs rippled through the warriors. Some nodded, others spat in fury, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Blood Crow's eyes glinted as he regarded Hollowstag, then turned back to Silas. In a voice rough as stone, the chief asked, "Do you claim us, child, or do you deny us?" The square fell silent. Even the flames seemed to bend toward the boy, waiting. Silas swallowed, his chest tight. He was terrified, but in that moment, he understood that silence would damn him more than any blade. With a trembling voice, he answered, "I am both. I am hers, and I am yours. You cannot tear me in two." A murmur rose like wind before a storm. Some warriors bowed their heads, others shouted in anger, and Rattlesnake Jaw nearly lunged before being pulled back by his own men. Blood Crow's gaze lingered on the boy, a shadow of something unreadable in his eyes, pain, pride, perhaps both. And as the torches flared high, it was clear, the fate of the valley would hang on the next word the old chief spoke. The square quivered with tension, every face caught between rage and reverence. Warriors shifted, the creak of leather and the clink of iron filling the silence. Rattlesnake Jaw shouted again, his voice cracking with fury. "He speaks lies. No blood of ours would stand beside a woman of settlers. End this now, chief." His hand gripped the spear, veins bulging in his neck. But Blood Crow did not yield. His eyes, dark as storm clouds, never left the boy. Then the old chief lifted his hand. The gesture was simple, but it carried the weight of generations. The chants quieted, the restless ponies stilled. "The boy carries both worlds," Blood Crow said, his voice low yet resonant. "To kill him is to kill the future of this valley. To deny him is to deny the spirits that placed him in our path." His words rolled like thunder, each syllable binding the crowd. For the first time, Silas felt the gaze of the warriors shift, not as predators, but as judges wrestling with doubt. The marshal stepped forward, rifle lowered but still ready, his jaw tight. "Then let him live under the law," he said. But Blood Crow shook his head, feathers stirring in the wind. "He will not live under your law alone. He will walk both paths, so the earth between us does not bleed." The declaration hung in the air, fragile yet unbreakable. Some warriors bowed their heads in respect, while others turned their faces away in anger. Hollowstag added his voice, steady and strong. "If he stands between two fires, let us see if he can hold them apart." The murmurs swelled, but no man struck, no blade fell. Rattlesnake Jaw, his fury unchecked, spat into the dust and stormed away, his loyal riders trailing after him. But even his defiance could not shatter the spell the chief had woven. The tide had turned, though not all accepted it. The townsfolk emerged slowly from their hiding places, their eyes wide with disbelief. Some stared at Silas with awe, others with unease. Reverend Obadiah Ashtongue Mercer muttered prayers beneath his breath, his faith shaken by the sight of enemies standing still in peace. Mercy Valen, tears streaking her face, clutched her son close, though she knew he no longer belonged wholly to her. He had been claimed by something larger, something neither bullets nor sermons could unmake. As the torches burned low and the warriors began to disperse, a strange calm settled over Dry Creek. The boy had not been taken, nor had the town been destroyed. Yet no one doubted that the valley had changed forever. Silas felt it in his bones. He was no longer just a child hidden in a cabin's shadow. He was the hinge on which two worlds turned. And though the night had ended without blood, the scar of it would never leave. Years passed, but the memory of that night never left Dry Creek. The valley still bore its scars, charred fence posts where fires once licked, hollows in the earth where torches had burned into the soil. Yet the land lived on, stubborn as the people who clung to it. The boy once called Silas Pale Cub Drayton had grown taller, his shoulders broadening with the weight of both paths he was destined to walk. His hair was still gold, but his eyes carried shadows far older than his years. Every autumn, when the leaves turned copper and the wind sharpened, Chief Blood Crow came down from the ridge. He was older now, his gait slower, but his presence still commanded silence. The townsfolk no longer hid when he entered Dry Creek. Instead, they stood aside, wary but respectful, as he walked to the square where the standoff once threatened to drown them all in blood. Silas always met him there, and the two would speak beneath the same cottonwood tree where the raven once perched. Few knew what was said, but all sensed its weight. Mercy Valen aged too, her hair silvering, her eyes softer with years of peace that were never promised. She never let go of the truth that Silas was born from fire and blood, yet raised in her arms. She would watch him from the porch, her heart torn between pride and sorrow, knowing that part of him always belonged to another world. Still, she smiled, because he had not been lost. He had chosen both paths, and in that choice, she had not lost him entirely. The town itself changed. Where fear once ruled, uneasy respect grew. Some still whispered about curses, about mixed blood and broken destinies, but others saw in Silas a bridge that had spared them from ruin. Even Marshal Abner Cold Flint Harkins, who had lived long enough to bury his doubts, admitted one night at the saloon, "The boy saved this valley without ever firing a shot." For a man like Harkins, that was as close to reverence as words could climb. One autumn evening, after another long council with Blood Crow, Silas returned to the cabin carrying a small gift, a feather dipped in ash and tied with leather. He placed it on the mantel beside the raven carving hollow stag had once left, a reminder of the night when his life had been torn in two. Mercy touched it gently, her eyes wet, and whispered, "You carry us all now." Silas nodded, the weight of her words not a burden but a truth he had finally grown into. And so the valley lived on, scarred yet whole, its people bound not by law alone or blood alone, but by the fragile bridge of one boy who became both. As the years wore on, Silas often thought back to the words of the old chief. They echoed in every choice he made, in every step he took between two worlds. Sometimes, in the West, the sharpest blade was not the one that cut, but the hand that reached out first.